what are some of the earlier experiences with friendship?
Oh, yeah.
Either witnessing friendship or, experiencing it firsthand.
Man. Yeah, have you thought of one?
Oh, yeah.
Go for it.
My first experience with friendship was that I didn't have any friends.
Welcome to the Enso Project. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. So the purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. So with this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, welcome to our podcast. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me to our podcast.
I threw you off there.
We're doing a morning session, at least for the next 7 minutes and 10 seconds.
Exactly.
So I think we're talking about or continuing the attachment styles. Right, attach.
Because we started riffing on this last time and had so much fun, lost track of time. We promised our listeners that we were going to talk about Freud's 3 pillars, love, work, and play,
right.
Which we did end up fact checking.
We did.
It checks.
Yeah, it checks.
So that's always nice. But anyways, yeah, we wanna fulfill our promises.
Right.
That's important. So we're going to talk more about attachment and detachment today, and we've already defined it. Really?
Yeah. Yeah,
so,
we already defined it.
That's handy.
It is. Now, I don't have that definition on me right now.
Josiah.
I know.
Gosh.
But
that's okay. The good news is I had, if you might remember this from earlier, I had suggested that I might start us off with a quote.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. All
Sounds
right,
good.
Let's do this thing. I love quotes. Here's this one. Attachment is the great fabricator of illusions. Reality can be attained only by someone who is detached. What a strong statement by Simone Weil. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It looks like you.
What does this quote mean to you, though?
I think we're talking about observation, right? So reality is, yes, it's experienced. Yes, it is. You're living in reality. You're participating. But I'm not sure if you can truly understand reality unless you observe it. And so I think in order to fully and comprehensively observe reality, you have to detach in some way from reality.
That seems to track with what Simone is trying to share with us.
Yeah.
I was hoping that we would just pick this quote apart because it uses some really strong language. Right? And anytime we start speaking in absolutes, I feel like it's the hallmark of claiming to know more than we do, right? Because we really know precious little. Like you were talking about, what does it mean to understand reality? Do we have the infrastructure necessary to understand reality? That's a whole podcast in and of itself, really. And specifically what Simone says, she's talking about the attainment of reality. That reality can only be attained by someone who is detached, which sounds more like a theory to me. I don't know has anyone attained reality so far?
I think, yeah. I think to some degree. So the way I like to look at reality is it's more, or the way we experience reality is like the way someone would, like I said before in previous episodes, someone would be looking at the same thing and have a different vantage point, or a different perception of the same thing, which makes sense because they're seeing it from their eyes, right? And so I think once you're able to observe other perceptions or collaborate or compare in some way, then you gain perspective, which I think is really what maybe they're describing here in this definition is this person or group or whoever, individual or group, has observed reality or different perceptions of something or someone or something, some entity and its behavior, and taking enough time to reflect on that, collaborate if there are other perceptions there, and then formulate some sort of perspective, rise above, all the vantage points to some degree, including their own.
Yeah. We got dense really fast this morning, didn't we? I feel like usually we have like a warming up period. There's a little bit of, hey, how are you?
But, how are you?
That's okay. I like this. I think, I really appreciate your perspective because you use big words to describe it. And I genuinely appreciate what you're saying. But in my mind, I don't know why I said but first. This isn't contradictory to what you were saying at all. It's just that I think of trying to attain reality. You're talking about perspective and vantage points, right? I think that trying to attain reality is like taking a coffee mug and dipping it into the ocean and being like, behold, I have attained the ocean. Right. It's like, no, you have a cup of seawater, And I think that's really like, that's the infrastructure that we have. Those are the tools that we're working with in this dynamic. So, reality attainment, I literally do not know what that means. Yeah. And I think that because we only ever can conceive of, can perceive a tiny fragment of reality, because we experience the world through this mechanism of awareness, right? That we're only touching, it's like if reality is Saturn's rings, we're in like 3 square feet of it, and that's all we get exposure to at one point in time. And it would be completely hopeless, I imagine, for us to experience the whole of reality, because that to me would encompass every single human and maybe non-human experience that has ever occurred since the dawn of time. I don't know. It's like I said.
Well, I agree. But reality. The funny thing about reality is, it expands within the container that it is being encompassed in. Right? So, if let's go back to your ocean analogy. If I'm not aware that there is an ocean, and someone brings me the cup filled with the seawater.
It's salty.
But I've never actually, they can't describe the ocean. They can only describe what's in the cup. And they say, this is ocean. Well, then that is ocean for me, because that is all I'm aware of. Right? And so that might as well be, all the great bodies of water, all the great, oceanic bodies of water, because it is the representation of the ocean. And I think that is what reality is to some degree. When we look at those different perceptions or vantage points, it is the representation or reflection of a particular process or iteration of existence. Therefore, it is existence. I don't think they're different.
Right. I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Are you distantly related to Picasso?
Of course.
Okay.
I'm a human being.
Right. Yeah.
Everything that existed in Picasso exists in me to some degree.
Thank you for confirming that, because it makes perfect sense how you took my metaphor, which was, it was okay. And you made a small tweak, and now it's a masterpiece. So that you
thanks,
really
I love you too.
Home. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I will say this another thing, right?
Yeah.
So Yeah, you're on an Apple computer, right?
Is this an Apple?
I think it's a Mac, right?
Okay, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know why we decided to be so goofy on today's podcast, but
But yeah, I mean, that is Apple to you.
Mm.
You're not aware of their balance sheet. You're not aware of their profit and loss statements. You're not aware of multiple factors that are Apple, but you are aware of your experience with Apple. And as long as it is a positive experience, you are now going to see Apple in a positive light, right? If you have a negative experience, you're going to see Apple in a negative light. And there may be 50 good things or positive things that come out about Apple, but to you, Apple is your experience. It is as big as that, right?
Yeah.
To some degree.
This is my reality.
Right. And then it would take several perceptions, right? I think there's a critical mass of positive or negative experiences, but the inverse experience for then you to expand, right, your view or gain new perspective on your vantage point that you had, right? So, same thing. I mean, I just think that's how reality works. And if we're confined to our own reality, if we're attached to our own viewpoint, then we don't truly see reality. We're simply just living inside of it. And we have to detach ourselves from our experience with our reality to actually see how reality behaves, or all the characteristics, as many as we can become aware of.
That makes perfect sense to me. I feel like, and thank you for bringing it back to attachment, where we so desperately needed to return to. This reminds me of, the conversations that started the inception of this podcast, right, which took place in a dimly lit bar over a couple of pints of Guinness.
Right.
But we're not there right now. We're in a real, podcast studio, so that means we need to circle back to our agenda. Get on to attachment. So, good stuff. All right. There are a few different vantage points we're going to use today when we try to examine the concept of attachment and its inverse, detachment. The first one of those is attachment in a family context. And I'm so excited to talk about this because I think it's one that is so easily relatable for most of us, because these are where we learn how to attach. And attachment in this context this is not a bad word. This is absolutely essential for us learning to connect and trust and invest in others and be invested in. So how would you like to approach this concept of like attachment and family? Is there a good starting off point in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, like I would start any other thing, like, get to the actual provenance of a thing, right? So if we're going to examine attachment, when is the first, or what is our first experience with attachment? With the bonds in our family, or were they trauma bonds? Were they, actual love bonds? Like what does the composition look like? Did we have an attached parent and a detached parent? Did they, what did that basically? What is our first experience with that particular thing, and then how did that impact us or frame how we, behave or see?
I think that's the perfect place to start. And since we're the two participants in this discussion, I'll go ahead and kick off and just use a bit of my own experience. Right. I didn't anticipate how vulnerable this actually might be, but I think this is such a common thread, for so many of us. So, I'm also just looking up over here the Harry Harlow experiments. I don't know if this is at all familiar to you, but these were like in the 50s and 60s. Harry Harlow was a psychologist who studied love and attachment in primates. And, they ran experiments where they would have, a surrogate mother for these little creatures that was soft and provided nourishment. And then they would have instances where it was like literally just a little metal structure that kind of resembled the little monkey's mother. And some of those provided nourishment, some didn't. And it was just really, really interesting. I remember one of my neuroscience professors in undergrad, he was like, well, if you want to understand how the engine in your Honda works, you should try to understand the engine in your lawnmower first. It's a single cylinder. So it's the simplest version of this concept that you can possibly study. And that was kind of the metaphor with these little guys as well.
It's your cup of ocean.
Yeah, it's your cup of ocean.
Yeah.
Thank you. Again, the connections. These are great. But I know for me, I grew up with one very attached parent, and one, I wouldn't say like avoidant, but definitely less attached than the average, parent. And like for a variety of reasons, I think that came to be, but it was confusing in that moment, but informative across the long arc of time, right? Because I had two very different samples.
Yes.
And they both have their benefits, right? So, I would say with my mom, it was more of a, bordering on enmeshed attachment. I don't know if that's a familiar term for most folks, but enmeshment meaning there's a layer or a degree of codependence inherent in the relationship, right? We are, we're not only party to, but we're also responsible for the emotional well-being of that the other party in the relationship. And so, it's like, I definitely remember, I remember my mom crying as a child, and I remember being, it was totally normal for me to be there and support her, whereas with my dad, I never saw that man cry. Still not sure if he cries. So that's why I'm hoping this can be a common thread, but also, I think as a child, it can be confusing to desire that attachment from your more detached parent, and not receive it. That's like, I'm sending these signals out. I'm not receiving any signal back. That's odd. Am I defective? I think that's a natural cause and effect conclusion drawn by many people, and especially children. And then last observation, before I stop oversharing on this podcast and turn it over to you.
to overshare.
Right?
Reciprocal.
I appreciate that. Thanks. Is that my mom eventually kind of realizing when you're a child and you're in that type of situation, you have no idea what it's just normal.
Yeah.
It's your normal. So I think that can create some, how do I phrase this gently, unreasonable expectations of your partner, your romantic partner, which we'll get into later. But we draw so much, from those formative childhood experiences. They provide the color and, to this landscape of our lives.
And meaning. And invariably purpose
as a result.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I love how you framed your early experience with attachment and the different styles. For me, considering my position in my family. And the not consequences, but the
ramifications. I'm
drawing a blank. See, this is what happens when we start in the morning. It's also 12:12. That's pretty cool.
That's the afternoon.
So Yeah, I think the circumstances of that led to, me being born into my family, I think they made me a bit of an observer. I was from day one detached, while being like a physical embodiment of attachment, and I'll explain how that works. My dad was married, 5 kids, and at age 32, his wife abruptly passed away. And he, was left with, like I said, 5 children. The oldest at the time, I believe, was 7. The youngest was around 5 months, 5 or 7 months, something like that. So, my mom, complete opposite, never been married, well into her 30s, 4 years older than my dad, so she was 36 when this happened, and no kids, always wanted a big family, but that stems from her upbringing where, she had a large family, but the dynamic was basically detached style parenting that led her to want to have a big family, right?
And a big connected family.
Right.
Okay.
And because the prospects were, I'm just, spitballing here, but I would imagine, in multiple conversations with my mother and watching her growth and development, even, in these past 36 years, I imagine, because of the type of person she is, those prospects weren't there. And so that's why it took her so long to find, the right situation.
Yeah.
And, some would say it's ordained or it's a, purpose behind it. And that could be true as well. I'm not denying that. But my point is, with respect to family, because that's what we're talking about, it led her to want that. And she finally found it. And, of course, this, like when people are blending families, if one spouse doesn't necessarily have a child with that other spouse, obviously, then the thing that they do to kind of cement the union is, have a kid.
Yep.
So I was my mom's firstborn child, but I was my dad's 6th. And I have, it's funny because, and they may fight me on this when they hear this, but I behave like an eldest brother, and even in some cases revered as such. A strong sense of independence and autonomy, but yet if there are times when I want to behave like a younger brother, I'm excused, right? To do
Best
that.
of both worlds,
right? So and I can say that has also, I said earlier, it's kind of led me to, when I've observed the reality that is my family life growing up, I had more of a detached behavioral style, right, or attachment style. I was, a part of the family, but I really wasn't, in some way. It was kind of, because you got 5 kids that are, older than you. They got their own thing, and, so you're kind of always observing, one, because you just have so many examples to do that with, right?
Yeah.
And so the attachment thing was, well, we want to be, we all need to be a family, right? We need to, like, forget that this happened and just be a family, right? And so in some ways, what I learned is that there wasn't enough healing that went on because everyone was so, not everyone, but I guess the people calling the shots would be my parents. They were ready to just be attached because they had this huge event, or at least my dad had this huge event, which was a death. Yeah. And then my mom had been longing for this great family attachment, this big family attachment for at least 36 years. And, I'm thinking about myself as a 36-year-old now.
Wow.
Who is about to go into, as of the 20th of this month, will be my 11th wedding anniversary. And, I've always been a proponent of this. The family you grew up in is your parents' family. That's your dad's family, your mom's family. The family you start is your family. And so, going into the 11th year of the family that I started and seeing all these different styles, and then thinking about what it must have been like for my mom, who had never been married, who never had any kids, who had been longing to start a family. Mm-hmm. And she gets a supercharged big family. Seriously, right?
Yeah.
And at 37, 38 has me, who's supposed to connect it all.
Right.
Right.
A lot of responsibility there.
A lot of responsibility, and it is very easy to be like, "This is your purpose."
Right.
But even with that, I've always kind of been detached from it to some degree. So I'll pause there, right? Because I know we're, working on a project here, so I won't take all the time. But hopefully that was transparent enough.
No, definitely. I think that was awesome.
Okay.
And it makes me think about a little side quest for us here. Mm-hmm. The stakes are so high when it comes to our family attachments.
Mm-hmm.
We get to this point where we're like, well, if we don't band together, if this family falls apart, then like our lives have just crumbled.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as a result of that, there's a tremendous amount of fear,
mm-hmm.
and that fear can oftentimes lead us to run away from the problems, run away from the trauma. Like you referenced, there not being as much healing as there could have been.
Oh, right? Yes. There. It was, to me, it became apparent. It was funny because I found myself doing work that wasn't my own. It wasn't mine to really do. Mm-hmm. It was things that I observed. And we're not talking crazy stuff. It's just things like, working through, your parent dying when you're a child and never being able to truly process it
right.
the way you need to be, or being encouraged really to process things and try to understand what the implications are for your life as a young adult.
Yeah.
And then, going into being an adult, there are insights that I've had that, like I said, they're not really my own to really have.
Right.
But because I was in that reality and
mm-hmm.
detached enough and observed it enough, I sort of kind of understood how those things were impacting my siblings and how, like to your point, if we don't come together and be a family, we don't have meaning. Right. How that became the mission and the battle cry. And so, some stuff got leapfrogged.
I mean, I think that can easily become the prevailing paradigm that everybody buys into. Is just like, we at all costs we have to figure this out. And it's counterintuitive because I think, figuring it out means running towards the problem.
Right.
At least that's been my experience, right? Is that when we run away from the problem or we push it into a corner or something like that, it has like this snowball effect, or maybe I don't even know the snowball. It creates
dissonance.
Right. It does. Yeah. It does, but it grows. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's necessarily growing in substance, but I think it is growing in perception.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It distorts your reality.
It does.
It distorts the way you look at whatever that event or similar characteristics around that event may be, right? And yes, I'm bringing up a very traumatic example, a death in the family, but that is probably, I would say, where a lot of families do what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where they don't really process it enough,
Yeah.
right? They're just like, we need to come together as a family. This is highlighting that we're not close enough.
Yeah.
Sure, but I mean, that's evident. But it's
Yeah.
also highlighting that, you know, maybe you guys don't know how to deal with grief
Mm-hmm.
or loss
Yeah.
or regret or failure in any way, right? And maybe if there was a little bit more transparency with the people that you could trust around failure, around
Right.
loss, you would actually be closer. You would actually be more attached,
Right.
right? Because you could detach yourself from this ideal that you're supposed to, you know, embody or
Right.
exhibit in some degree. Right?
Yeah. We stop trying to conform to some perceived standard,
Or role.
and we can actually, roll and start just being authentic, being
Yeah,
transparent.
I mean, I'm a 36-year-old man, right? I think about this. My dad at 32 lost his spouse and was, you know, along with 5 kids. Now, he had extended family
Mhm.
that could help him out several states away.
Mhm. Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, he had to then, and this is very intimate, forgive me, Dad, but it's my podcast. I don't care. So, he took the 5 kids and brought them all the way back to the New Orleans area
Mm-hmm.
and dropped them off with their grandmother,
Yeah.
who they didn't have much experience with
Wow.
because there was some stuff that my dad had with his, childhood, right? So,
Right.
and instead of actually, my dad at that point was extremely avoidant,
Yeah.
right? And so that's how he handled it, to the point where he couldn't handle it at all
Right.
and had to ask for help. And so I think about that, at 32, how would I have handled
Right.
that, right?
Oh my gosh.
So I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, man, I mean, I don't think he, did the calculus on his attachment style and
No.
all this stuff that
No.
needed to be handled, right? He just reacted. I think most people would. So I'm just, it to me, it's perplexing, because when he resumed family life, the best thing that he could do was to really stay alive, in my opinion, is to just really fall into that role, that patriarchal role of being a father, right?
Yeah.
And the only way that he could be a father is if he had a family, right?
Yeah.
And if you say, wait, no, let's not be, our roles or behaving our roles, let's actually take time to heal, well, then that doesn't fulfill the role that he's trying to do to survive.
Right.
Right. So,
Gosh, it begs the question, like, are we equipped to deal with major crises?
equipped, yes. Prepared,
Right.
no.
That's the distinction.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we have the tools, they're built in. We just don't know how to use them. And, get into any handyman activity, realize you don't know how to use your tools. You might just hurt yourself or somebody else, So,
Yeah.
and that's oftentimes, I think, what happens. Though we could easily spend this entire time talking about family,
Right.
let's push the ball forward a little bit here. Let's talk about friendship. And I think this is so fun, not only because we're friends, but we have friends. We have friends in common, right? And we get to see these relationship dynamics unfold. And this is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of unspoken rules. And it's I think it all relates back to attachment in some way, shape, or form. So, yeah, where the heck do we begin with this one with friendships?
I think we start back with the way we started with family, right? So, what are some of the earlier experiences with friendship?
Oh, yeah.
Either witnessing friendship or experiencing it firsthand.
Man. Yeah, have you thought of one?
Oh, yeah.
Go for it.
So my first experience with friendship was that I didn't have any friends. when I was facing that hardship, and it was tough for me, and we're talking like first grade age, okay? And I was a younger kid in school right then. So there are all these variables, right, which I won't get into, but things that didn't make it easier. Right. But I do remember something that, my dad said. So I came to my parents and it's like, hey, no one will like play with me or, be my friend. And, my dad, he asked me a question. He said, well, what are you going to school for? Like, why do you go to school?
Yeah.
And the answer was to learn. Right. So I've kind of always, with respect to friendship, I've always sort of been detached, as you can probably attest.
This can confirm.
You're right. But obviously I'm not as detached as I used to be. I used to be like more of a robot. But
when did you become human?
When did I? I think Robin has helped me with that. So sometime within the past 16 years.
Yeah.
But I think with respect to friendship, I've kind of always tried to understand, okay, what is the point of this friendship? How is this a mutually beneficial relationship? I've always kind of approached it, like I said, in a detached manner. And I think that has been healthy for me for the most part, but I also can see how it can be perceived. And for the most part, this is how I approach friendships. We get to define what friendship means to us.
Yeah.
That's how I approach friendships, right? And that is a very detached style, right? But bringing in your previous friendships, that doesn't work for me because those unspoken rules are someone else's.
Literally.
Right. And so what is a friend? What type of friend do you need me to be? And if you need me to be that type of friend, is that actually something I can do? Right.
You're saying all the words.
Yeah.
All the words. So I'm going to riff on that for a second if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that one of my most revelatory and honestly like freeing realizations over the past few years has been about wanting someone to be something that they're not. And how this shows up in friendships is, I have to admit, my psychometrics would suggest that I'm a very strategic person. When, like, in my friendships, I really don't, I'm not friends with somebody for a specific purpose, but I think that also kind of ties into this, like, I trust this at a very deep, like, soul level, that I will meet the people that I am supposed to meet in the timing that I'm supposed to meet them. And I've just had enough life experiences, like case studies, to support this idea that I really like. It feels true to me.
I agree. No, I definitely agree with that. That has been my experience. It's like I said earlier, we definitely have all the tools. The question is, are we prepared?
Right.
And so I think if you're prepared, or I think the people, the things, whatever it is going to gravitate towards you if you're prepared for it.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're not prepared for it, you're not really going to be able to understand the benefit of it. You're not going to be ready for it. So back on the playground, I wasn't ready for friends. Right? I wasn't prepared for friends.
Right.
And in some cases, the more prepared you are for it, it is not as painful for you to lose it.
Right.
You don't. Well, it is as painful. Sorry. It's just not as. it doesn't, your identity's not wrapped up in it.
Okay, right. I like how you separated those two things. But I almost like your first point. I feel like our experience of pain, attachment or detachment, it's a moderator variable for that experience of pain. So it can greatly emphasize and accentuate the experience of that pain, or it can minimize it, or, because this is what moderator variables do, they impact the magnitude and the direction of the relationship. Mm-hmm. So I think that in some instances, embodying detachment in that relationship can, and this is crazy, this is a crazy thing to say, I'm saying it on our podcast, I think it can actually deepen the experience of gratitude for having had that relationship in the first place, knowing that you were never entitled to that relationship or that experience, of having Josiah Ball as a friend. I was like, have I ever said your last name on this podcast?
Yeah, I think you have.
I think I have too. Yeah. Okay, we'll leave that in. It's all good. But yeah, like how fortunate am I to have had that experience that facilitated my own internal process of becoming. Mm-hmm. So I love that, and I think that there are some interesting parallels that we could probably talk more about. But to go back to my original point earlier, before I became sidetracked, was that when we ask someone to be something that they are not, it's a blade that cuts both ways. It hurts us and it hurts the other person. I think you could make a compelling case for that being the least compassionate thing you could do to another human being, mm-hmm. is ask for or desire them to be in a way that they fundamentally are not. Mm-hmm. And this understanding has really, it's like a flavor enhancer. It opens up the palette of your experience in the context of a friendship, mm-hmm. To appreciate somebody exactly as they are without having that internal and external pressure of desiring them to be in a different way, which people may not be able to verbalize. Yeah. It might not be conscious awareness, right? But we can always feel it. I feel, pretty confident about that for most people, if you're socially in tune and connected, that you can feel when you are not meeting someone's standards. And the only standard the only standard that truly exists is, are you being authentic? Are you being yourself? Right. However, reality is we oftentimes set standards for folks that are not authentic for them at all. Right. Okay. I know it was a tangent.
I agree. I'll say some things on that real quick. I will do 90 seconds. Okay, so that's why this clock is here. Yes. All right. So, one, are we even asking people, what it is that, they bring to the table? Like, are we asking them, I need you to be this, or can you be this for me in terms of a friend? Then, on top of that, are we even looking at ourselves that way with respect to friendship? And are we expecting them to be something without asking them who they really are? And are we, in my opinion, this is the worst thing that we could possibly do with a person, is to not actually prepare ourselves for the possibility of what they could be. Right. I try to approach friendship with looking at what a person could possibly be. I just think people are behaving within the realm of possibility.
Always.
Right? And so I try to prepare myself for, chase the guy who has road rage and throws strawberry milkshakes on people's windshields, right? Because that is possible, right? And everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably have like a chocolate milkshake.
Chocolate milkshake.
And there's no strawberry, but
Yeah,
the rest
yeah.
was spot chef's kiss.
Yeah, and so that way, I'm not confined to some expectation I have for you, and I'm pretty much preparing myself to be and live in a position of grace when I need to.
Right.
When you require that
Right.
as a friend.
Right, which is frequent. Right.
Right.
It's a proxy for acceptance, right?
Yes.
Just come as you are, and that's
Come
how it
as
works.
you are is possibility. It
is.
just hasn't been realized in certain aspects yet.
Right.
Right? Like, maybe I'm saying this a little too simplistically, but that is, that is everything, right? Like, if I think that, Sarah should be here on time,
Which she always is, of course.
right, which she always is, and I'm just like confined to that idea, there may come a point when she's not here on time, and we can be so triggered. We can live in this certainty of what should be so much with respect to our relationships, particularly friendships, people that we don't know that intimately, because we don't spend that much time with them. So much so that, like I said, we get so triggered that we end the relationship on something that is really small,
Yep.
right? And doesn't really impact our life that much.
Yeah.
Right? And it's profoundly sad for us, because we lose out on everything else but that particular thing that we were triggered by.
Literally.
Yeah.
No, that struck a chord with me. I feel like that was really important, and that perhaps there, will be somebody listening to this that really benefits from hearing that. So
Sarah's never late, though.
never, absolutely not. She is a timely gal. Okay, so next up, we're talking about a romance, love, romantic attachment, and I think I was about to ask you where to start with this one, but it's obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, to me, it goes back to, like I said, the first romantic relationship you've ever witnessed, I guess, to some degree.
Oh,
right?
witness.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Because you're observing a couple to some, whatever the composition of that couple is. If we're talking about parenting, they're still a couple first.
Yeah.
Right, and there still was some degree of romance, even if it isn't present while you're observing it.
Right.
But there are inherently attachment styles that interact within that romance, right?
Yeah.
So I think, that's where I kind of go back to, like, how did I observe my parents? Like, how did my dad treat my mom, or how did my mom treat my dad, or how, what did I learn from that?
Yeah.
Right? And then, like, separately, when it came to treating the women in my life, or, like, women that I would need to talk to or at some point, to develop a romantic relationship, right? Like,
Yeah.
how did I learn how to talk to women, or how did I still don't know how to well, but, how did I learn how to behave as a man in a romantic relationship with respect to attachment and detachment?
Yeah.
Right? And then, obviously, what are the implications of that now in my romantic relationship?
Yeah. I feel like I should go first, but I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of just went first. But,
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't throw out any examples, but
No, I think the questions in there are so good. They make me think about how, like my earliest perceptions of my dad. I think he was kind of painted as this like ladies' man. Like
yeah, I can see that.
like the women would swoon. Yeah, you actually know my dad. That's so funny. But yeah, the women would kind of swoon, and but it was also, it was a game. It was a game, and he was the cat, you know, and in a game of cat and mouse. And so that was one perspective, and these two were like wildly different. So the funny thing is, the flip side of that, you know, my parents got divorced very, very when I was fairly young. I was, you know, like maybe 6 years old.
Right.
And so many of my formative memories around, you know, like what it might be like when I visualize having a romantic partner one day, you know, when I'm 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, was based off of my mom's dating experiences, which is hilarious. But, you know, my dad was fairly private about his dating. And, like, you know, I didn't spend as much time with my dad. We kind of did the every other weekend thing. And so for the most part, save maybe a day of the week, we were with my mom.
Yeah.
And so we, you know, got front row seats to her dating experience. And I just remember this kind of like string or cast of bad actors.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, and this is ubiquitous in today's environment. If I was on social media, I'm sure I could pop on there and find like 10 stories immediately about the goings on of, you know, dating life in today's society. But nevertheless, I was like, dang, guys, the bar is really low.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I've never been someone who I have very high achievement orientation, right? So it's not like the bar is low, I'm just gonna like hop over it.
Right.
It was like, I think I could be like world class at this, right? If these men are just they care so little, they don't treat like this person that they're trying to court with respect. They don't show any affection. Like, you know, my mom was very effusive, very like emotive. That's how words of affirmation, right? That's how she communicates love. And so I was like, it's not that hard to, you know, appreciate a woman and like share kindness and like acts of service. And so I kind of had this bimodal picture in my mind of like this, you know, Wild West cowboy out here, you know, cracking jokes and really popular with the ladies, but then also this like Prince Charming archetype of like, you know, do no harm, chivalry and honesty, integrity, character, you know. And it was just like, I reflecting on it now, I'm like, man, am I, you know, when I started dating,
polarizing.
It's polarizing. But like, there's this, you know, I think back to like, I was in 6th grade, so I was like 12 years old, and there was this 8th grader, right, that she was interested in me. So this is like my just earliest conception of like a romance, and I was like, okay, how do I blend these two together and become this person? It's very confusing. And, you know, it took a lot of iteration to get a minimum viable product there.
Right.
But yeah, that's my story.
Well, I mean, I actually love that, right? Because I think you had these polarizing expectations of how you were supposed to act with respect to dating and romance. And I think you know, articulated it very well, like, you know, how those expectations came to be. But, you know, did you actually see those two personality types or attachment types interact in a romantic fashion?
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought that was a rhetorical question. I was just over here nodding. Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay.
I did. It was and they would kind of like be pitted against each other at times, and then also sometimes just work in concert. Yeah. You know, there's nothing inherently opposing about them. You just don't typically put them into the same camp. It's like the maverick, and then also the like steady, stable, dependable. Which is, you know, this is kind of ironic just looking at me present day now and kind of like the life that I've built. It's like, man, is that
what is that?
Whoa. having a revelation on this podcast. But anyways, yes, to answer your question.
Because I think I definitely, well, one, thanks for answering that, because I think I got to see, I think I became the result of that interaction between the two styles. So I would say that my dad is more, he's definitely avoidant, right, and to some degree, but definitely attached. They both seem to be very attached. And like I said, I'm not sure if it's the circumstances of, their union.
It's unique,
Very unique, very unique. I'm not sure, what is attributable to that attachment. But I think I'm just very detached when it comes to the romantic relationships. And let me just clarify, right? Like, I'm not a sociopath. But I do love and care for that person. I'm just not emotionally influenced by that person.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Yeah. So, and I don't think I really observed that too much, but I definitely think there was a harmony in some way. And there were probably a lot of conversations that, obviously I wasn't aware of that led to that harmonious, display, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, yeah, I see. You're not really that upset. I see you're upset. It's like I can understand or read the emotion well enough to know, like, okay, this is serious. Right. I need to really pay attention, lock in. Yeah. Enough to know, like, okay, this is something that I need to actually pay attention to. Yeah. So that's why I think the romantic relationship or attachment style, I think that's kind of where it comes into play. Like, how much are you swayed by your partner's emotion, like their emotional state? Right. Like you said, like you could hear your mom, right?
Yeah, you're like, mom's crying. I'm gonna go comfort her. I might cry or I might not cry. Like, right. But it's kind of like that. The display of empathy, right, is reassuring, and then it can become like expected. It's
right.
Crazy.
And I'm not asking you this. I'm just saying, like, a detached style would be more. I see you're crying. But I'm not sure why. Like, a detached style would try to understand what's actually going on. Not saying that they would fix it. They just they wouldn't start crying, right? Or they wouldn't start. It wouldn't wreck their day, but they would stop and say, like, okay, are you okay, or what's going on? And if that person wanted to actually talk about it or do something about it that involved that other person, right? Then they would take the time.
I'm no expert, on like enmeshment, but in my mind, that is the your feelings are my feelings. We're fluid. There's no separation between us. And like, I don't know, my experience, that doesn't feel very healthy to me. That's not.
Yeah, it's not healthy at all.
I'm not trying to pass judgment, but it's not the type of relationship that I want. Right. And so I have consciously cultivated relationships that don't involve that, where that expectation is not there. Yeah. And although, like, if I came home and Rachel is there crying, like, I will definitely have an emotional response to that. But I'm not crying that she's crying. I'm not, like, upset. I am. It's concern.
It's concerning.
Yeah, it's concern, and I can be, like, my emotional stability is still safe. We're in the clear, and that allows me to be a resource and show up, right? Because if I go to pieces, then, like, now we're just both in pieces, and we're that's not what we're looking for.
Right. That's not.
It's not very helpful.
It's not very helpful at all.
All right, you want to move on to business, and then we'll see if we touch on strangers or not?
Yeah. Business.
I think business is, I thought it was perfect the way you were talking about it just a second ago. The, kind of anticipating emotions and knowing like whether or not they're serious. It's funny because like when we evaluate candidates for a role, if it's a high touch role where they're interacting with clients or they're in a sales role, right? We're going to measure their emotional intelligence. And one of the ways that we do that is through recognizing facial expressions. And it's so interesting to me because it is quite challenging for some people, and it's totally intuitive to others.
Yeah.
But we recognize like what context clues are we using here, and in a business setting, that's obviously perfectly applicable. And I also think like what happens when the project doesn't go the way you planned. There are an infinite number of variables. Any one of them has the potential to negatively impact your engagement. And at that point, how do you anticipate, is this a problem that the client is like deeply disturbed by, or is it a minor annoyance? Because we want to proceed differently with each one. So recognizing attachment styles in a business setting, I would say, is actually of the utmost importance. I don't know, what do you think about that?
It is. I mean, especially in a team setting, but I also think we, in a business setting, I don't think we really understand emotional intelligence the way we think we do. When I think about emotional intelligence in a business setting, it's typically more of a detached style. And what I mean by that is people that aren't swayed by their emotions. One, they're processing their emotions fairly quickly, and they're not allowing their environment to then influence their emotions, because emotional decision making cannot be the best thing for business, right? And then also, if you're going to be successful in business, this is just my observation, better be able to handle criticism. Yeah. You better be able to handle failure. And if you're not emotionally intelligent, how can you handle those things?
It almost seems to me like when you are talking about this, it sounds like of the big 5 personality characteristics, like neuroticism. So we measure this, and we measure it independent of emotional intelligence. This is like the even keel, the level-headedness. Different tools have different words for it, but it's just like your how tall and secure is the gate around your emotional garden.
Right.
That is like that emotional stability component. Whereas the way that we perceive or conceptualize of it would be, like emotional intelligence is what is going on in your garden, and what's going on in the gardens, near you.
I agree. Also, what are you displaying? Because I think
what are you presenting?
Right? Because I think, one, are you presenting the adequate and appropriate emotion for the environment, or the mission, right, of the business? And I think it's what is it, Nietzsche, right? It's not free will, it's the not free will, right? It's not the emotions we we see or we can read, or how well a person can read an emotional response from someone. It's really, in my opinion, how well they choose which emotions, how detached they are from their own in some degree, because like I said, when you make those emotional decisions in business, it can be catastrophic, right? But you also want to be able to anticipate how a person's going to respond and pick your response perfectly.
It's like in a previous episode, we closed with this concept that emotions are kind of like jet fuel. They can propel you to great distances, or they can cause you to combust, catch fire, be a dumpster fire. And I think that this is very true in this context too, because emotions they're a window to our intuition sometimes as well. And granted, I was having a meeting with we have this awesome alumni group, and we were talking about how do you distinguish between fear and intuition? Because sometimes they can feel similar,
Right. I think, how do you make that distinction?
That was the concept that we were discussing,
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if anybody has a perfect answer to, but.
Well, I think you examine the behavior, right? And that is a perfect concept, right?
Yeah.
Around business and also around strangers, because a lot of the things that we perceive as fear, really, because we have no context, because we don't know that person as an individual, it could be something else.
Right.
Or a lot of things that we don't see as fear really could be fear.
Right.
Right. And I think we have these behaviors or decisions that we're making that are rooted in some emotion, but we don't know enough about that individual, that stranger, that business associate, right, or partner, to really make the assessment of what emotion is actually driving the behavior.
I think that, you just made a really compelling case for human understanding, and that applies to our internal, relationship as well. How well do we understand ourselves? How well can we understand others? Because that's the context, in most situations.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'd like to share a little quote. Any closing thoughts on your mind that you're looking to share?
No, that was lightning fast. That's it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so here's our closing quote. Sometimes letting go is an act of far greater power than defending or hanging on. That's Eckhart Tolle.
Nice.
So
yeah,
we just want to thank you all for listening. Wish you a lovely rest of your day or end of the day or whatever time of day it is for you. Hope it's a great one. See you next time.
The Enzo Project is brought to you by Bold Human Capital and Noon Holdings. Edited by ELE. You can find the Enzo Project on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music, the song Full Bloom by Jewel and Nuamina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.